Good morning, good afternoon, good noon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Compliance 1010. We believe this time we have audience from all across the world in all time zones. With more than 2,500 registered audiences for Compliance 1010. This is the seventh year when we are celebrating compliance on the 10th of October. Of course, by now, almost everybody knows why we picked up 10th of October as a date, because you got to score 10 on 10 when it comes to compliances. 9.99 is not acceptable because that point 1 or 0.01 may not only land you into problems because of non-compliances, but actually can shut down your businesses. And business disruptions are probably far more uh, consequentialist agents for pushing the corporates to comply. You know, while I extend the greetings on behalf of Legasis family, greetings on behalf of compliance professionals on this October 10th, uh, I want to I want to start laying down a proposition today, which is to say that this day is not Legacy's day. It's not something which, although we conceptualize this, but this is not the day of Legacies. Actually, it's day of compliance professionals. We started this off in India. We're taking it across the globe. And this seventh year, our resolve is going to be that we don't consider this to be one company, or let's say Legacies or Bombay Stock Exchange promoted uh, event. We actually talk about it and look at it as more democratized compliance professionals compliance day, which is the 10th of October. This is again, I'm repeating this. This is the seventh year. Uh, when we started off 6 years ago, we had no clue what the acceptance from corporate sector would be. We just picked up ideas because we thought whenever we've gone to various factories or various client locations, there were safety days, there were environment days, there were consumer days being celebrated in the corporate sector. And we said, if you have to provide some amount of respect to the compliance professionals, we have to look at compliance profession or compliance activity with pride. Then we got to bring to the forefront of business consideration the compliance professionals. So they need to be respected, rewarded. We need to get an element of pride in them. At the same time, we need to also make sure that they're accountable. They're accountable to all the stakeholders that they're responsible to. I think what we started off 7 years ago as a small journey today has capitulated it into a more like uh, compliance professionals every year looking out for this event. They're wanting to understand what's happening on the October 10th next year, probably a year in advance. They're looking forward to this day and this event as one of the events in their professional journey, which respects them, which gives them respectability, which actually makes them more responsible, because this motivates every nominee, this motivates every compliance professional to do far better and come out with some life-saving stories. Uh, Having said this, you see, when we started off again, we had hardly about 220 nominations. Over the period of time, I think the number of people who came together with us, joined us in this journey, now has increased to 1,000. This year's nomination figure, and we had to limit it at 1010. We have 1,010 nominations. To borrow from what Mr. Damodaran says, is that we today have more than 1,000 compliance professionals in corporate India who are looking into the mirror and saying, hey, I have done something right for me to be worthy to file this nomination in Compliance 1010. These nominations, we've kind of uh, evaluated them, we've shortlisted the nominees. Uh, an independent jury actually looks at and sets this process. We do not, Legasis does not interfere uh, in this process. So therefore, I think this is a journey. When we started off the compliance 1010 in year one, probably we said, compliance is a continuous journey. We got to make sure that everybody understands compliances as not a one-time task to be completed out of the task database and tick mark, but it's a continuous journey whereby you keep on making sure that the organizations are compliant with whatever are their compliance obligations, whether statutory, regulatory, or the self-imposed internal compliances. So we said it's a journey. Year two, we probably brought in the concept of compliance mission, because we said that even though you may say this is a kind of a continuous journey, unless you take into missionaries approach to convert people who are normally doing tick the box approach into an understandable compliances, or compliance with understanding of law, with knowledge of why compliance has to be done, then we said we will have to consider this to be a missionary approach. And I think we introduced the concept of C mission or compliance mission. Then we requested our own compliance professionals, our clients representatives, non-clients, and everybody to ask this question to oneself: comply kiya kya? I think that was a tagline that we used in year two, year three. We said, on this day, just ask yourself, comply kiya kya? We actually had a pledge undertaken by everybody. People signed the pledge documents and said that I will demonstrate an exemplary behavior when it comes to compliance reporting. uh, so actually, we brought the concept of pledge. We brought the compliance concept of compliance as a mission. Then we introduced the concept which is compliance by choice. We said just because law tells you to comply, it may not be enough. It may not be proper for you to say that I'm complying because law is telling me to comply, or there is a statutory regulatory provision and that's forcing me to comply. That we said is may not be enough. That's a good reason for you to comply with whatever is the statutory and regulatory provisions are, but that may not be good enough for you to comply. So we said once you change your mindset, and this happened somewhere in 2014, 2015, we said you change your mindset that you're complying not because the legal provision is telling you to comply, you're complying by your own choice. Now, that's where I think the predicament was, and a lot of people said, what is this nonsense that you're talking about? You know, where is the choice to comply with? Uh, so actually, we said, no, it's a mindset issue. Compliance has to be done. There is no two ways about it. But if you say, by my own choice, I'm going to be compliant, and that is where the change in mindset that we talked about. It was not about whether you have choice to be compliant about it or not. So it was main compliance by choice was my choice that I choose to be compliant, rather than I choose to circumvent the provision of law, or I choose to quote unquote manage the compliance regime. So actually we introduced this concept, which is compliance by choice. I Our clients and people and corporate sector like this, because I think the approach was a very lowbrow approach. It was completely different from what everybody thought compliance was. And we said compliance is a normative behavior. In the normal circumstances, we end up being compliant. Non-compliance is an aberration. Non-compliance is abnormal behavior. It's aberration. And non-compliance is something which is a deliberate act of commission or omission for that matter, by way of which you choose to be non-compliant. So you would choose to be compliant, you choose to be non-compliant is your choice, and therefore compliance by choice was introduced as a concept by us. And I think thanks to everybody, thanks to almost every compliance professional, that they accepted this to be a far better proposition than merely a legal proposition driven by a statutory provision. Uh, So the compliance by choice was the concept that we introduced through Compliance 1010. We also introduced uh, Compliance and Ethics Academy to create the capacities in the compliance professional space. We today have, and we take pride that we're probably one of the first ones in India to have the certification course for compliance and ethics professionals. And there are more than about 125 professionals that are certified today. While this was happening at our end, I think the world was changing, and the world has been changing almost on a daily basis, if not quarterly and yearly. Uh, there are various legislations that changed, that brought to the forefront, or probably that there are a couple of legislations that actually talk about a compliance officer being designated statutory position, so to speak, where companies are required to designate a compliance officer. Example being, unpublished price sensitive information on insider trading, you've got to designate a person to be compliance officer. Uh, Now, therefore, I think the legislative mandates and the legislative provisions became more and more dynamic, in as much as in a year, probably we see a change in our database to the extent of almost about 2,500 compliance tasks are getting changed because of the change in legislative provisions. Uh, Having said that, of late, I think the changes have been far frequent, and this has virtually destabilized, so to speak, the destabilized the ecosystem, the compliance ecosystem completely. So we've seen that there have been tremendous legislative changes hitting every year that have changed the compliance ecosystem. Just to give you examples that, when recession became apparent, when the insolvency and bankruptcy code became very, very prominent, and the companies were going through a churn out there, we realized that uh, being compliant was already becoming tougher by the day. Uh, and then come COVID. I think from January onwards, the rumblings were there. Supply chains were getting disturbed. Uh, we had the real impact starting somewhere in February and March. And actually, in the middle of March onwards, we completely into lockdown. The lockdown is getting released slowly. So when we looked at this situation, what we realized was that while the essential manufacturing and essential services and essentials as a sector continued to support the entire ecosystem, and therefore we had to support the essential services sector and the essential manufacturing. At the same time, the understanding of impact of COVID on various laws, including for the purposes of compliance, was a tremendous consequence on the manner in which, whether somebody worked from home, somebody worked from manufacturing place, somebody worked from office, whether somebody provided essential services, all of this became very, very important and relevant in the context of various guidelines that were issued by the governments. There was tremendous talk about force majeure being there. There was, so actually what we thought was one thing, one learning that was there for us is to quickly come back to ensure that we are able to provide support services to our clients. And actually, that taught us as to how to do it when you are not there in the office. So COVID-19 has been a great teacher for all of us, and it has taught us how to be resilient. It has taught us how to stay relevant. It has taught us how to embrace digitization. We actually kind of went back and said that on a daily basis, we will connect with our clients, we'll connect with the compliance professional, and start explaining to them what has happened in last 24 hours that changes the compliance professional's life, whether it is relating to the risk, whether it is relating to their function as a compliance professional, whether it is relating to AGM being conducted through video uh, conferencing, or simply what was the understanding about the circulars issued by the Ministry of Home Affairs under the national under the National Disaster Management Act. So actually, I think staying relevant during the period was not by design, but was by default created as a situation because we thought we have to be there. Now, in this context, and this context of COVID, context of lockdown, context of economy recession, context of economy shrinking further, and no end in sight, is the situation with which all of us are grappling today. But in this context, we thought it is not only necessary, it is not only expedient, it is not only essential, but it's absolutely critical for all of us to look at and revisit what we call as a grace. Governance, risk, assurance, of course, compliance is at the center. Then we talk about ethics and driven by IT, because we have had challenges of working in brick and mortar, working in physical space, and we all working through in the digital space currently, partly or fully. So actually, grace it is is the hallmark with which we said we must, in compliance 1010 this year, focus on grace it in various forms and manner, and that is predominantly the theme of compliance 1010. uh, Thank you very much once again for joining us on 10th of October. Thank you very much for responding to our clarion call to be agents of change in compliance and ethics ecosystem. Thank you very much.